Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us for our final Farming Essentials webinar. My name is Lisa Rayner. I'm the Livestock Project Officer for StockSense. So hello to anyone who's joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those who are joining us again. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land at which we are gathered here this evening. I wish to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community. So I'm from Wurundjeri country down here in Melbourne. So I'd like to welcome everyone here today, or Wominjeka in the Woi Wurrung language. So just a bit of a background and a refresher for where we are on this journey. This series has covered 6 areas on that farming journey. So owning or buying a farm, farm layout and essential facilities, buying animals, what you need to know, the first few months, animal health, nutrition and welfare, and now we're on the last one, the long-term plan, sustaining your farm. So the link to the video recordings, resources, links will be sent out tomorrow to anyone and everyone who's registered for the Zoom link. So don't worry if you have to stop out or pause and step away for midway through this one, there will be a recording available for you to watch when it best suits you. If there's anyone who hasn't done the survey, this is a great time to do so. I'm just going to leave this up for a few moments on the screen. You can just take your phone, point the camera at it, scan the QR code. It should pop up with a link. And it's just a survey with 6 questions. It should cover your region, if you have animals, a few bits and bobs. And there will also be a post survey today as well, because this is the last webinar. We just want to get your feedback of what we've done right and what we've done wrong so that we can improve for next time. So that would be great. So just a review of webinar 5. Before I introduce Peter Ronald, I just want to review what Dr. Chelsea Hare covered last week. So she covered the animal health, welfare and nutrition requirements of livestock and how to keep them happy and healthy while they're in your care. The first topic was preventative healthcare. So that was while they were quarantining for those 21 days and the importance of vaccination and drenches. We then moved on to the varying nutritional needs of animals. So that will change depending on the life stage of the animal, whether they're pregnant, whether they're dry. We also went through some deficiencies that might pop up depending on what region in Victoria you might be. There was a link to just check on those things. Dr. Hare then spoke on body condition score and how it's a really great tool to actually check on the health of your animals, especially sheep. So they have a lot of wool and they can hide whether they might be a little bit skinny. So it's good to know how to do that and check on that. We were talking a little bit about having access to shelter, and that didn't actually need to be built shelter. It could be trees, providing that wind shelter and sun shelter for animals during extreme heat and extreme cold. The final 2 was recognizing health issues. So key things like drooling or droopy ears or them staying at the back of the herd, just to keep an eye on what might, those little signs that your animal isn't doing the best. And then when it's time to actually call a vet when they're getting a bit too sick. So for today's final webinar, we have Peter Ronalds, a longtime Landcare facilitator and sustainable agriculture consultant, to talk about what goes into that long-term planning and management of your land. So thank you, Peter, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thanks, Lisa, and it's great to be on. Thank you for to the VFF StockSense team for having me. As Lisa said, my name is Peter Ronalds, and I have been a Landcare facilitator for a number of years, and more recently a consultant, and my business is Inspired Ag Solutions. So I live in Jindivick in West Gippsland, and when I listen to a presenter, I like it when they tell us a little bit about themselves, as we all have different skills and knowledge and passions, and we're all on different journeys, and we can learn from each other. And I can learn from you just as much as you can learn from me. So I was a dairy farmer for 20 years. I started off as a farm apprentice when I left school. I then share farmed and built up my own herd within a family partnership. And in 2005, I did extra study in sustainable agriculture and natural resource management. I actually left the farm. My brother's actually owns that now. I landed the job with Western Port Catchment Landcare Network, which is in West Gippsland in Victoria. And my specific role was to engage farmers with a focus on sustainable agriculture. So I set up trials and demonstrations, established farmer discussion groups, ran farm planning courses like we're doing tonight, more in person than online back then. Wasn't online back then, actually. running training programs and exposing farmers to new ideas and concepts. I worked in Landcare for 13 years full-time. As a community organisation, Landcare is very dependent on government funding, and in 2018 there wasn't enough funding for a full-time position. And by that time, I'd been in the role for 13 years, and I was getting a lot of farmers wanting advice from me outside of Landcare. So I actually set up my business, Inspired Ag Solutions, in 2018, do a lot of consulting for farmers, large and small. I've been on some of the biggest farms in Victoria, and I've been on little farms in Victoria too, and you'd be amazed actually what farmers can do on small acreage if they do it really well. And I've seen farms with not much bigger than 1 acre, 1 to 1.5 acres, turning over $1 million. It's surprising what can be done, particularly in the organic horticulture space. I've also been taking source carbon samples for over 12 years. I'm probably one of the more experienced soil carbon samplers in Victoria and Australia, and I've sampled hundreds of properties throughout Victoria, all over, and into New South Wales as well. So that's just a little bit about me. And that's my family. You can see there in the middle picture. I'm married with 2 adult children. Son's in agriculture as an agronomist. He's just started this week, actually, after completing a degree at Charles Sturt University, and my daughter's in retail. So tonight we're going to cover 3 main themes: sustainable farming practices, where we want to be in 5 years, and where to find support to help you on your journey. So they're big topics. We haven't got time to go into huge depth on each of those topics, but what we'll do is we'll dig into them a little bit, and hopefully you'll take away some nuggets that'll be really of value to you and your farm business and your property. So I'm going to break down the sustainable agriculture practice into 5 areas. We can only summarize each of them, as each of them is probably a day's training in its own right as a minimum. We're going to cover regenerative agriculture, soil conservation, native pastures, shelter belts and agroforestry, and weed and pest management. They're all critical land management issues and challenges and practices that we need to get our heads around and understand so that we can have the best chance of success in our farm. Firstly, regenerative agriculture. What is it? What is regenerative? If you look in a dictionary, you'll see that regenerative is defined as regenerating or building. I think it's far deeper than just sustaining. It's more than sustainable agriculture, I believe. It's actually going a lot further, and I'm going to challenge you on a few things shortly. So I've been involved in setting up a regenerative agriculture training program with soil scientists and other partners several years ago, just before COVID actually. And it's a 7-week training program that over 100 farmers have gone through in the Gippsland area, particularly the West Gippsland area, and down through the Bass Coast area and the Mornington Peninsula. There's a huge interest in regenerative agriculture, with a lot of claims being made and a lot of vested interest. And I think we've got to look past a lot of the fluff and really dig down to actually determine what it is. There's a set of generally accepted principles around regenerative agriculture, and they're listed on that circle table there. However, regen ag practices are not defined. The principles most people are pretty accepting of, but the practices are not defined, and there's a big difference between principles and practices. Practices will vary on different farms through different seasons and with different enterprise types. As I said earlier, we're all on a journey, and everybody's journey is just that little bit different from each other. Your farm and family is the same. How you apply these principles will vary from perhaps how I might apply them or how your neighbour might apply them. I think we need to remember that even though regenerative agriculture is a hot topic, basically the principles that are outlined on the screen here are basically best practice farm management. And I think it's important to note that there's not a set of defined standards that need to be met to claim regenerative status. It's different from organic. If you're organic, there's a set of standards that you need to adhere to and be audited on so that you can make that claim and actually market your produce as organic. We don't have that in the regenerative system. So that's something to be aware of. So I'm going to put a challenge out there. I hear many farmers who claim to be regenerative. However, most haven't got the data to be able to back up their claim. I've visited hundreds and hundreds of farms, many hundreds, and most of them are doing a really, really good job. However, to make a claim to be truly regenerative, then I think you really need data. I think you need baseline information and follow-up data to monitor your changes. So I'm going to cover some of the things perhaps we should be looking at when we're looking at the whole regenerative agriculture sphere. This is a really neat diagram, and I think it outlines a lot of the natural assets on our farms, which are depicted in the diagram. I think if we claim to be truly regenerative, we need to be looking at, building every one of these assets on our farms. We've got water. Is the water leaving our property cleaner than what it was when it entered your property? Are biodiversity levels increasing on your farm? As you continue to manage your farm practices, are you helping biodiversity on your farm, or are you hindering biodiversity on your farm? Your practices will have an influence on what you do in that regard. Are your soil health indicators building? Your soil carbon levels, your soil nutrient levels, soil biology? Is the water infiltrating better? Are your pastures becoming more diverse? Are your animals thriving? And are your animal health issues declining? Are you contributing to a cleaner atmosphere through being more strategic with inputs that are perhaps less energy intensive? I think it's worthwhile looking at all those aspects of natural capital, natural assets on your farm, because they're the things that we need to be regenerating. We need to be improving them. We need to be caring for them and looking after them as stewards of our land. And perhaps one thing that is not mentioned on that diagram or depicted in that diagram is community. I think we need to be active and positive contributors into our community as well. I think that's a really important aspect of being regenerative. Onto some soil conservation discussion now, and we could spend a real lot of time on soil management, so I only have time to tell you a couple of little nuggets that hopefully you can remember and take home with you. So we've got a pie chart here with soil, the composition of soil. So there's multiple characteristics that make up soil, and the biggest component is mineral particles. So that's actually the sand or the clay or the rock or the gravel, whatever you've got. It's the mineral component of your soil. Generally, it makes up about 45 to 50% of a well-structured soil. Then you've got your air. Now, you might not think that if you were to dig a shovel, that you would dig up, a big divot of soil, that there would be 25% air in it. But you might be quite surprised if you've got a well aerated and aggregated soil, which we all want to achieve, you could have 25% air in it. And you need that. The microbiology need the air to survive. Water makes up to 25%, depending on the time of the year that you actually do this, do the testing, but that's a really critical component of your soil as well. So you've got about 95% of your soil made up of either mineral particles, air, or water. If your soil is waterlogged, for example, that water component will be pushing out that air component or taking out that air component. So you might have, in a waterlogged soil, 40% water, 5% air. And that's why the soil becomes anaerobic. You know, you can't, and smells awful because it's actually rotting. It can't breathe. It's struggling to breathe. If you think about it, well, yeah. And the other component, the main component, is organic matter, and that comprises about 5% of soil. So I want you to think about it like this. Perhaps think of it that your minerals, your air, your water is the main frame of a computer. Yeah, it's the box. It holds everything in there, and then the organic matter, the 5%, that's like the computer chip that makes the computer function. So that's really, really critical. So the organic matter is where primarily all your nutrients are held, where the roots are, where the microbiology is, where your living and dead organisms are. That's your key. That's really important that you look after that side of it. Over here on this diagram, you got some worms up the top. We'll talk about worms in a minute. They're fantastic. We need as many worms as possible. The bottom picture depicts a really simple diagram about the importance of keeping your soil covered. Soil needs to be covered. And we've got a picture there. We've got like a water container that's been cut. And then we've got soil that's been placed in there undisturbed. So basically it's been taken out of the ground, put into that water container. The middle one, we've actually got soil that has been put in there and then covered with mulch. It's been tilled soil. It's been dug up and broken up and then put in there with some mulch on top, some wood chips, some grass on top. And then on the right, we've actually got the bottle with soil in it that has been tilled and just put in there, no coverage. What's happened is then that we've poured a watering can, so we've watered the soil evenly over all three, and then you can see what happens as the water soaks in and then runs off. So it soaks in, and then as the water fills, as those little containers fill, it starts to come out of that spout at the front there. So you can see how clear that water is in the soil that has grass coverage on it. The grass and the roots have protected that soil. You could nearly drink the water that's coming out of that soil. In the middle one, we can see that the mulch has actually protected it, but there is some losses in soil because we've actually got some darker colour, some browner colour into the discharge area that's come out of the spout. Then if we go to the far right, we can see the colour of that soil is really, really dirty. And we can see where actually the water can has actually eroded that soil and destroyed that soil structure. So that's a really simple, classic example. It's simple field research which shows the importance of keeping ground cover. We're going to talk about ground cover when we talk about pastures, but it's so important to keep your soil covered. And if you haven't got grass, then you need some sort of coverage of stubble or mulch or something like that. Mulch if you're vegetables, for example. Point number 2 on soil conservation is that the biology is driving the system. So that's the 5%. So we're looking at, in that 5%, we've got humus, we've got roots, and then we've got organisms. And organisms make up about 10% of that 5%. So in that whole pie, they're about 0.5%. But the biology is the most critical thing. We need to really manage that and look after that. So we talked about the computer mainframe, you know, with the minerals, the air, the water, and the organic matter as the computer chip that drives it. Well, then we've got the organisms, the 10%. Think of that as the solar power or the electricity that actually drives the whole thing, that makes it work. So that's what we need to be considering. And a lot of people talk about how many cows they stock per hectare. And we've got a picture here where we've got 1.5 cows per hectare. And if each of those cows weighs 500 kilograms, we've got about 750 kilograms of live weight above the soil, on top, actual physical cows. However, if we just look at the worms underneath the soil, this is a classic. If we're running 70 worms per metre, and scientists dig these things up, and they count these worms. I've done some worm counts. It's fun, but it's tedious. If we're running 70 worms per metre, that means we've got 700,000 worms per hectare. And they've actually measured worms. And these worms they measured weighed 3.4 grams as an average. So if you calculated out the 3.4 grams by 700,000 worms, you've actually got 2.4 tons nearly of worms under your soil doing recycling nutrients for you, doing work, aeration. You've actually got more wildlife under the soil than you have above the soil. So I think that's really important to know. And this doesn't even include ants and beetles and slugs and snails and centipedes and fungi and bacteria and all the other fantastic stuff that makes things work. So remember, we need to be looking at what's under our soil, and we need to be looking after the wildlife or the life under our soil as well as we're looking at the life on top of our soil. Next thing we're going to talk about is pastures. Now, there's many types of pastures and lots of people get confused between them. And, the topic was native pastures, but I'm going to cover a range of different pastures because I think we really need to get our head around it. A lot of people really get confused between native pasture and unimproved pasture. And so many farms, even experienced farmers, still struggle with it. Native pastures are comprised of species that are indigenous to the area. So these are like kangaroo grass, wallaby grass, weeping grass, stiper species, some tussocks, things like that. They're not bog grass, bent grass, sweet vernal. They're not native species. They're actually, or native pastures or native species. They're actually naturalized. So they grow well here, but they're actually low productive imported species. So they're a cross between unimproved and improved pastures. I would put them in the unimproved bracket, but I think it's worthwhile noting that native pastures are quite different and they're quite unique and they're not as common as what people think they are, particularly if you're in Gippsland, West Gippsland, South Gippsland, or the Otways down that area. You get into the drier areas, the grassland areas, up towards Ballarat and Western Victoria and Bendigo and up those areas, you will see a lot more native pastures. You'll also see native species on nature strips, even in wetter rainfall areas, but not a lot of them. They're a critical part and there's critical habitat in those native pastures, but they're not easy to get established. They don't like generally high nutrients. They don't like competition. So if you've got an improved or even an unimproved pasture, you will struggle to get native pastures established. However, if you've got them, then look after them. Improved pastures are pastures that are generally made up of ryegrass, clover, cocksfoot, phalaris. They're species that are high performance, highly productive, highly nutritious. The livestock do really well on them. Perennial pastures are pasture species that actually continue growing into perpetuity. So they're made up of species such as the cocksfoots, the phalarises, the ryegrasses, some clovers. We want them. They're really important. They're growing basically all year round. Then we've got annual pastures. Now, annual pastures are species that only grow through one growing season generally. So they're things like oats, wheat, barley, vetch, things like that, radishes, brassicas, things like that, crops. They're things that will grow, and they grow quickly and fast, and they'll generally grow a really good bulk of feed, and then they will set seed, and then unless the seed hits the ground and germinates, they're finished. So they're quite different from perennial pastures. And then there's multi-species pastures, and there's a lot of talk around multi-species pastures. I'm a fan of them. I think you can get multi-species pastures very well in perennial systems. A lot of the multi-species pastures that we see are comprised of annual species that are sown into perennial systems, and they have their place as well. You can particularly grow summer active annuals, such as millet, for example, and brassicas, through the summer when your ryegrass pasture paddocks are not doing quite as well. Likewise, in the winter, you can grow peas and oats and barley, things like that, into perennial systems and get more bulk feed through the winter if you were to do a minimum till type direct drill sowing. So how do you know what you got? There's some pretty good ute guides around, some pasture guides around, which are online, so you can access them. Basically, it takes experience and someone to help you along that way. When we're doing the regen ag training or other courses with farmers, I like to get them to run transects out. So on this picture, we've got a few local farmers. We've got a 50-metre tape measure out. We've run the tape out. Every metre will record the species that is actually under that little metre dot on the tape measure. So we might get a ryegrass, we might get a clover, we might then get a chicory, we might then get a bit of bare ground, then we might get a capeweed, and then we might get 3 ryegrasses in a row. And by the time you've gone through and got your 50 measurements, you can tally them up, and then you can accurately calculate what percentage of the different species we have. And that's really powerful. And I've worked with farmers who've been doing this a long time, and sometimes they've been shocked at the results that they get. Particularly in drier conditions on red ground, we get a bit of red soils that is really productive, but in the summer dries out. And if you overgraze it, you can get bare ground quite easily. And we've seen bare ground 15% on quite commercial farms, and that's 15% of space that is not photosynthesizing, it's not growing anything, it's not protecting the soil, it's productive loss. So grazing management, which we'll get to shortly, is key. It's the lowest hanging fruit on most farms. Whatever pasture we have, whether it's native, perennial, annuals, multi-species, unimproved, improved, the growth is driven through the miracle of photosynthesis. And this is just amazing. It's the process by which plants use sunlight and water and carbon dioxide to create our oxygen that we breathe, and energy in the form of sugar, carbohydrates, which is carbon, which drives life, drives our life, it drives the plant's life, it drives the animals that we feed. If we're growing vegetables, it drives the vegetable growth also. It's critical, it's amazing, it's incredible. 4 factors affect the rate of photosynthesis though. And the faster the factors occur, the more the plant will grow. So the more light we have, light is number 1, the more light we have, the faster photosynthesis occurs. Water is the other one. Lack of water slows photosynthesis down. So whether that's rainfall or dew or just little water systems within paddocks. I've been in paddocks in the middle of summer in the morning and there's no dew, but it's moist. Your gum boots get wet because of the little water cycles that are happening within the plants. Temperature. Photosynthesis works best at around 30 degrees. So that's why late spring, you get terrific growth. Levels of carbon dioxide are the other driver. Hear a lot about carbon dioxide. We need carbon dioxide. It's a very important gas. Photosynthesis is fastest when there is more carbon dioxide in the air. If you're growing tomatoes in protected cropping systems, often carbon dioxide is pumped in to actually increase the growth of the tomatoes or cucumbers or capsicums or whatever is grown in hothouse situations. So it's nothing to be scared of. As I mentioned, the lowest hanging fruit on most of the farms I visit is in grazing management. I usually spend a full day training farmers on different grazing management techniques, but there's one really simple rule. Take this home. It's the nugget. Rotate and then rest. Now, how long you rest the pasture for will depend on how quick the pasture recovers, and that will depend on photosynthetic potential, the time of the year, the species, a whole range of things. There's no set rules. Some people say you need to graze this many days or this many months or whatever. Oh, sorry, rest it for that length of time. However, there's no set rules. To do it properly, you need to graze when the pasture's grown back, okay? Too many farms, I see the cattle graze it or the sheep graze it, and then the cattle are back in there in 2 weeks or 1 week, or they're in there the whole time, or it's a month, but it should be 3 months perhaps. You've got to adjust your grazing depending on your pasture growth. Now, grass farmers grow roots. Now, when you are always continually keeping the tops of the plant chewed off, your roots will eventually stop growing and you're going to really limit the plant to photosynthesize. When we're grazing, ideally you want to be leaving some leaf material so that the plants can photosynthesize. The sun is free. The nitrogen in our atmosphere is free. Moisture is free. All these things are free. However, you need to have a leaf material. You need that leaf. Think of the leaf as a solar panel. It's driving the whole system. If you take off the solar panel, the plant actually has to draw it from its root reserves to grow the first leaf after you've grazed it. If you leave a little bit when the take the cattle out maybe slightly earlier and leave a little bit of solar panels, leave some leaf material there, depending on how hard you grow it, the roots will not die back, and you've already got solar panels functioning, helping the plant to grow rather than drawing reserves from its roots. It's really important. Chelsea last week discussed the nutritional requirements of sheep and cattle, and we really need to understand that because it's so important. And it's important to understand that your pastures change at different stages of growth. Once we know this, we can determine whether the nutritional requirements of our pasture is adequate to meet the needs of our animals. So what we've got here is we've got a table where we've got a plant growing. Now, take it as a grass. It could be a cocksfoot, it could be a phalaris, it could be a ryegrass. When it's short in the top left-hand part of the screen, it's actively growing, it's green. You can see that the digestibility and the energy, so digestibility is on the left-hand side, energy is on the right-hand side of the scale, is at its highest. It's there that it's most digestible and has the most amount of energy. As that plant starts to grow and flower, the digestibility and the energy and the protein of those plants decrease. Now, once you get to a certain level, you can see that we change from green to orange. So once you start to get the plants late flowering in head, you can see that the digestibility drops to around 55 to 60%, and the energy drops from about 7.5 to about 8 megajoules of energy per kilogram of dry matter. That will only maintain your dry stock. It is not enough for lactating sheep or lactating cattle, dairy or beef, or fattening cattle. You need to have a combination. You need to make sure that the animals are actually getting enough digestibility, enough energy, and enough protein for them to do what they need to do to either put on weight or to feed a a calf or a lamb. Once you get left with dry stalks, and you see dry stalks in summer on some farms, the digestibility and the energy is so low that your animals, even though they will eat it, they will actually lose weight. So you're actually slowly starving them. So if you get pasture at that level, you need to look at what other additives I need to add into the system to actually lift the energy, digestibility, and protein of that feed so that the animals are not losing weight. The only animals that should be losing weight are freshly cowed calves who are really producing a lot of milk, and the calves are stripping it out of them, and lambs the same. Or if you've bought some really fat cows and they're way too fat and you're worried about calving and they're empty. So you really want to make sure that you get your head around what the nutritional requirements are of your livestock that you're growing. So best practice grazing management leads to multiple benefits, and they're all listed here. Improved pasture productivity, improved diversity in the pasture. It's surprising, but if you graze your pastures correctly, you will get a reduction in weeds and you'll get more diversity of species. And you'll get improved animal nutrition, which leads to improved animal productivity and improved animal health. And animals are so important. We need to be looking after them properly. It's the lowest cost of production. It's really important. So there's many, many wins if you can get your grazing management right. As I said before, it's the lowest hanging fruit on most farms, even commercial farms that I see. Now, here's a bit of a word of advice and warning. And I've seen this quite regularly. Many farmers get really, really enthusiastic when they hear about a new product at a field day that they attend, or a salesman comes along and talks and makes some impressive claims. And the farmers get really excited. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to trial this, and it'll work like this. Well, sometimes it doesn't work as claimed, unfortunately, and sometimes it costs farmers lots and lots of money. And I've seen farmers lose thousands of dollars by not doing their research, perhaps I can say. I see it's a risky decision if you're trialing new things, and whether it's a new product or whether it's a new grazing management technique or trying to establish new pastures, there's risks involved, and you need to weigh up those risks, and you need to perhaps do smaller areas so that you're not risking the farm. So if you're going to try something new, set up some test strips and monitor the change. So, the top right is some replicated trials that I ran a decade ago, where we trialed some quite alternative products against normal superphosphates and ureas and so forth, and got some really, really good results. And from that trial, a lot of farmers come along. We had 2 replicated trial sites in the region, exactly the same, and we were doing pasture cuts so we can measure yield. We're testing soil biology and carbon and chemistry. We're testing plant nutrition, feed testing it, and we got some fantastic data. And what I'll say is some alternative products work really, really well, and some don't work that particularly well. And some may work well in this situation, but maybe not in your situation. So that's why you need to run some smaller test strips. Now, you might not want to do a replicated trial like this, which is quite involved. You might just want to run some test strips in the paddock. Now, this middle paddock, it's an interesting one. There's some fertilizer being applied there, and you can see the difference. So if you can actually see a difference with your visual eye, there's a minimum of about 25 to 30% increase in growth, whether it's color or difference in height that you can see. That's the actual reality. So we can see some really, really big differences here. Now, that wasn't a replica, that wasn't a trial site on purpose, actually, but it's a great example. It's actually a farm we were leasing, actually. when I was farming, and there was an issue with the fertilizer spreader who was spreading it. Now, we can see that the fertilizer worked. It's unfortunate that he didn't get the whole paddock spread at the same time, but it's a great observation. So, you know, if you're trialing something new, spread it out across a part of your paddock and leave some and see what happens. See if you can see the difference. It might surprise you. Don't forget to monitor under the soil as well. You know, dig some holes. You know, some of the products I've seen, I can go back 10 years later and actually dig, and you can actually visually see more worms under that particular product. So that's really, really interesting. There's plenty of online tools available, including videos and visual soil assessment recording sheets, where you can actually go out with a spade and a few other little pieces of equipment that most people have in their shed, your tape measure and things like that, to record your results. You can get some easy wins. We'll move on to trees, agroforestry. Trees are just wonderful. There's so many benefits we can get out of trees. However, one of the biggest disappointments that I see and hear from farmers is the issues that they have with trees on their farm. Now, trees are an amazing resource. However, it's so important you do your research before planting a tree. Work out what your end goal is. Then do your research to avoid the pitfalls that so many farmers make. A free tree is not necessarily the best tree for your situation, depending on what you want out of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some opportunities in the agroforestry space and also in the biodiversity space. Not saying they're separate, but there's different opportunities in the two different spaces. So in the biodiversity space, Landcare and CMAs are really, really strong. There's often grants where farmers can actually get trees. They do a fantastic job in working hard to apply for grants and then distribute those funds to landholders and help them with support to get the trees established and help them and guide them with layout and species selection and a whole range of other things. If you're interested in biodiversity particularly and planting trees to EVC, which is ecological vegetation class, which is what was originally there before settlement, then Landcare and CMAs are gold. They're really, really valuable. However, the trees that they offer are generally only indigenous to your particular area, and they still require lots of management. All trees require management, even the biodiversity trees along waterways and up gullies and whatever, they need management. The other option, not option, but another alternative is agroforestry. Agroforestry are where you're growing trees for perhaps a slightly different end purpose, you know, potentially high value hardwood, or for fence posts, or for nuts, or for something that you're going to sell. Whatever you do, you need to remember, or you need to plant your tree and get good advice, keeping in mind what your end goal is. If you're just wanting biodiversity, Landcare CMAs, fantastic. If you're wanting to plant trees for nuts or fruit or for hardwood, then you need to go outside of Landcare and CMAs. You need to join an agroforestry network, get involved in farm forestry groups, things like that. Vic Forests currently have grants available for farm forestry on farms. That's well worth exploring. But certainly don't rush. Spend time on design. The guy in this picture, fantastic guy, local guy in our area. He's been growing trees for decades. He's now harvesting them. He's harvesting them one at a time and selling them to a boutique builder who's using them in breweries and houses and so forth. You know, real feature stuff. There's some real opportunities out there. You know, don't think you just grow a tree for pulpwood and off it goes to Maryvale or off to China or whatever. There's some really good opportunities out there. I would thoroughly recommend that you do a master tree grower program if you're interested in trees, even for biodiversity. It gives you the understanding of how trees can work for you, how they grow, how to plant them, how to select the species that will work for you. And there's going to be one, if you're in Gippsland, there's going to be one later this autumn into early winter, 7-week program. It's gold. I've delivered a few of them, been a participant. I've even been to Africa and trained hundreds over in Africa with the Master Tree Grower program. It's been a privilege. Get involved. Talk to me later about that if you're interested. Weeds and pest management are a big issue on many farms. I'm not really going to talk about pest management. You know, rabbits, foxes, deer, kangaroos, wallabies, wombats. There's a whole range of things that people class as pests. Some are indigenous, some are exotic, and so forth. But I'm going to talk a bit about weeds because it's a confusing topic, and we've got some legal obligations that we need to adhere to. So there's lots of different classifications. We've got national classifications, which are nationally significant weeds, which we'll discuss. We've got Victorian classifications, and then we've got things that we just class as, well, they're a nuisance, so they're a weed sort of thing. Firstly, we'll talk about the nationally significant weeds, or the classifications for national weeds. So there's three. There's wands, which are the weeds of national significance. There's the alert list, and there's sleeper weeds. So you'll be familiar with lots of the wands weeds. So there's 32 weeds on the wands list. They include blackberries, serrated tussocks, lantana, willow, gorse, amongst other things. They're common, but we can't ignore them. Then you've got your national alert list. So they're in early stages of establishment with potential to be a major threat. Most of them are not familiar with them. They're weeds we generally not heard of. We generally won't have them on our property or probably anywhere near to us. Then sleeper weeds are weeds that spread rapidly after a disaster, natural event like a bushfire or a flood or a drought or something like that. They can take over really, really quickly. And I was on a farm, a client up central Victoria, and they were in the Goulburn flooded, and Bathurst burr, and there was just covered the farm and couch grass. It was very tough for them. It just took over because they were underwater for weeks on end. So they're sleeper weeds. Then we'll talk now on the Victorian noxious weeds. So there's four different classifications of weeds in Victoria. They're state prohibited weeds. They shouldn't be here. So we don't really need to be concerned about them. Unless we find them on our property, then we need to be concerned. Then there's restricted weeds. So they pose an unacceptable risk to Victoria, to agricultural biodiversity, and the sale or trade of these weeds is prohibited. And transport of these weeds, you need a permit too. So that makes some complications for some. But we generally don't have to worry too much about them. But note that bridal creeper and willows are on that list. That's something to keep in mind. Don't go selling them. You will get in trouble if someone finds out. Regionally prohibited weeds are the next layer. So they're not common, and they must be managed for eradication if you have them. Okay. Then there is regionally controlled weeds. So these are widespread in a region, and your obligation is slightly different to regionally prohibited. Regionally prohibited must be managed for eradication. Regionally controlled, the Act says you must take all responsible steps to eradicate them and prevent the growth and spread of eradicate regionally prohibited with regionally controlled, prevent the growth and spread of regionally controlled weeds. Now, depending on where you live in Victoria will depend what classifications different weeds fall under. For example, in Gippsland, you might have a weed that's regionally controlled, but it might be regionally prohibited somewhere else, and vice versa. So you need to look at what weeds are actually regionally prohibited and regionally controlled in your area, because you need to manage them. And in the resources at the end, I'll give you the links so where you can find that information. And they're simple, and there's really nice pictures of them and things like that. So it's good. Now, it should be mentioned that the Victorian government is responsible for controlling state prohibited weeds on private and public land. And Victorian government, or the Department of Ag, DEGITA, or it's Ag, or what is it now? I've forgotten what it is, climate change, DECA, I think now, or something, has a responsibility for enforcing provisions. So you do have obligations. So don't be the neighbour who doesn't do anything and everyone will talk badly about you. So there's also environmental weeds. Agapanthus is a classic. These have potential to actually get into bushland areas and native vegetation areas and compete with the indigenous species. So need to watch them. You see them along nature strips, you see them in gardens, all sorts of places like that. You know, take the heads off agapanthus, don't let them seed, don't let the birds, take them away to the bushland areas. And then we've got pasture weeds, and I've got quite a few pictures there down the page. I have on the last couple of pages. Hopefully you identified a couple. So at the top, we've got yellow buttons. So pasture weeds are seen on all farms. Basically, if you haven't got a pasture weed, you must be dynamite with your herbicide, I would reckon, because I haven't seen a farm that doesn't have a pasture weed. Pasture weeds are good in some ways because they indicate potential issues around soil nutrient status, grazing management, and soil health even, and nutrients. Yellow buttons up the top, commonly seen in saline areas. So if you're seeing these sort of flowers in areas that perhaps catch a bit of water, sometimes you might see some little bits of white glistening area around it as salt crystals, a really good indicator of salinity. So if you've got salinity, look at some of the species that you could potentially put in there that may be a bit more productive by scattering some seed around in those areas. A second weed down is barley grass, very common, particularly under trees, high nutrient zones, drier conditions. Number 3 is docks. We see docks a lot in wetter areas. We've got them in West Gippsland everywhere. They grow well in compacted soils because they have a really long taproot, so they can actually grow, push their way through deep compacted soils. And you can grow chicory if you, in the same areas that you're growing dock. They've got a similar taproot architecture. Sixth one, the bottom one, cape weed. That's purely nearly always due to grazing management. Overgrazing in summer is the best way if you want to get a cape weed crop. So, grazing management, I said, you can really manage for So on to point 2, and these ones will be a little bit quicker. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Really important to set aims of where you'd like to be and then work towards that. Farming is extremely rewarding. Nearly everyone who's a farmer, Malcolm loves farming. You can tell when he talks. I love farming. I love it. It's extremely rewarding. And I love now helping other farmers to meet their aims and objectives. However, farms, even though they're extremely rewarding, can be greedy. They can be greedy for your capital, and they can be greedy for your time. So you need to be realistic about what your aims are and whether they can be achieved. You know, you might have an aim of being profitable 4 years out of 5 or 5 years out of 5. You might have an aim to plant a certain percentage of your farm to trees over the next 5 years. You might have an aim to replace expensive imported inputs with lower cost or locally sourced inputs, or even homemade inputs. There's some opportunities in that space. You might have an aim to go away on holidays every year for 4 weeks. Fantastic aim. Who can argue with that? We all want that, don't we? But we need to remember that things can go wrong. You know, people can get sick, people can die. They do die. Everyone dies some stage. You know, sometimes we can't do the things that we hoped we wanted to achieve because of things that come up in our lives. And some of them are tragedies. Some of them are just normal parts of life. We get older, we get tighter, it gets harder. We might have a bushfire come through. You know, the picture on the left is at our place in Black Saturday. You know, we had that fire didn't hit our home property, hit my brother's lease farm, wiped that out, wiped a heap of farms out in our area. It was scary stuff. It took months and months and months. It took years to recover from that, from the farmers who were impacted. Things like this do happen. We need to plan for that. So there we are in the Maldives, maybe, I'm not sure. Looks pretty nice though, doesn't it? If we go on holidays, how are we going to manage our livestock? Have we got someone there who can manage them for us, who can look after them, that we can trust? Every farm should have a plan with all partners' input. Discuss your dreams and aims and write them down. You know, you'll be surprised how similar your aims will be with the other partners in your farm operation. You'll be amazed. You might think you have different dreams. Generally, if you write them down, they're often really, really close. Write a vision statement for your farm. How's that? That's really good to do. I've seen some farmers who have done that, and then they've just stepped up to another level. Yeah, they've got something that they're really aiming for. Create a logo. Wear it on a shirt. Be proud. You know, have everyone in your family wearing a shirt. You know, promoting what you're doing. Be proud of what you do. Remember though that there's many ways to get to the end point, and there'll be differences in how you get there, but keep coming back to the farm plan and review annually and update as required. So set short, medium and long-term goals and tick them off when you achieve them. Go out for dinner, celebrate them. It's good. It's good to get wins, but make sure you do it with your family. That's really, really important. So where do I get support from? There's a lot of support out there, many avenues. Yeah, the web is good. Yeah, I get some great information off the web, but you know, the best avenues are with other farmers. Farming can be really socially isolating, so ensure you join a local farmers group, not just to learn, but to immerse yourself in a regional community. Many farming groups are really top-notch and conduct groundbreaking research, and they share the knowledge through their networks. Join them and learn from them. There's some top farmers and lifestyle farmers in these groups. You know, make new friends and be a positive contributor in your communities. Farmer discussion groups are amazing learning opportunities. I facilitate a number of them, and some of them I've been running for over 10 years, and those farmers are like brothers and sisters. You know, we had another bushfire go through a few of our farms in 2019. The discussion group members went out 3 times. They cleaned logs off fence lines, they rolled up burnt wire, they brought their tractors out and pushed up trees, they did all sorts of stuff. You know, the sense of community in regional Australia is amazing, and you know, be a positive contributor into it. Landcare is an amazing organisation. Get involved. If you need professional advice, consult with a vet, an agronomist, get an independent one, that's not going to try and sell you something. Talk with your neighbour. I see too many fraught relationships with neighbours. Really try and make that a priority to really get on with your neighbours. They can be your best mates. Nurture the relationship. If you have a fire or flood come through, you're going to be working together, building fences and helping each other, putting stock together and getting them back into place. You need to work well with them. So make that a big effort, and most of all, make your family priority. So on that list, I've touched on them. Farm discussion groups, Landcare runs them, private consultants run them, AgVic run better beef and better wool groups. Landcare, Landcare groups can be really active or they can be really dead. Hopefully you got really active ones in your community. Get involved. If they're dead, be the one the spark that lights it up. Industry groups, VFF, the opportunities to join your local branch. Gippsland Ag Group, fantastic organisation in East Gippsland. Southern Farming Systems, another fantastic industry organisation. Birchip Chopping Group, I should say, not chopping. Melly Farming Systems, they're all over Victoria. Get involved in them. Dairy industry has discussion groups as well, I should mention. Get involved in local community groups, whether it's churches, sporting clubs, progress associations, all play a valuable role in the community in helping to support the communities. They're the ones that come together when things get tough. They'll support you. Your neighbour, I've mentioned, advisors, independent if possible. However, there is some excellent sales agronomists out there, really well qualified. Some of them really do have farmers' interests at heart. I work with independents and sales-based, and I have no hesitation in recommending some sales-based agronomists because I know that they'll put the farmer first. So not all of them will. Some will want to make the sale, but you'll get to know them. So time for questions.
Malcolm's already there. To add to that list of groups, I'd also like to mention there are some people in New South Wales and in the top corner of Victoria. Riverine Plains is another really good group, and also talk to your catchment management authority. They have some awesome projects specifically focused for people buying new land or small blocks, and so they're a good help as well. Malcolm, you have a question. I also have a question that has come in through the emails. Malcolm, you go first.
I just want to point out you haven't put an MLA on there, and
That's another one.
And rural financial counsellors.
Another good one.
Yep.
So very important.
Yeah, some rural financial counsellors are situated all throughout Victoria. They may be interstate too. I'm not 100% sure on that, but they provide a free service. You don't have to be on the verge of bankruptcy to be able to access them, or on the verge of suicide. If you're just struggling, they will come out. And I know a few very good rural financial counsellors, and the service is free now, so that's fantastic. And they will see those who are not just on the verge of bankruptcy now too, which is great.
So if anyone has any questions, you can pop it in the chat. I can unmute you and you can ask your question verbally, or you can just type in the chat. While people might be giving some time to think and to type everything out, I think I have a question that's really relevant in terms of weed management that we were talking about earlier. They mentioned they've been clearing out creeks during this dry spell while they had good access, and it's become silted and attracted massive weed growth and mosquitoes. Any reseeding that they did in the disturbed areas that they've cleared have quickly been eaten by birds and a large group of wild ducks that they have on site. Weeds quickly adapt to the bare soil, exposed by any clearing that they do. Is there any spray-on seed available? I'm not sure what they mean. Maybe you know what they're talking about. Is there a spray-on seed available for farmers to use, or another approach I could try?
Yeah, it's really, really challenging in those situations. Where in some cases, shading out creeks can actually help to prevent some sort of weed growth. We have a weed called sweet glyceria, or sweet reedgrass in Gippsland, and it clogs the creeks However, when revegetation programs are generally taking place, they generally spray it with Roundup Bioactive, and then they will clean the drain a little bit to make a bit of a water course, and then they will plant it. Glyceria doesn't like being in the shaded position. It likes the full sun, and generally once the trees grow bigger, the sweet glyceria tends to disappear, and then the soil dries out a little bit with those trees as well, and that can lead to a really good outcome. And I've seen some really good projects through doing that. So that is one way. Depends on the weeds that are growing too. So some weeds, some of the, if they're the big kumbungi type things that can be 8 foot high, that they're really hard to manage. And I don't like using herbicide. Sometimes you just have to use an excavator and some herbicide. It's you've got no options. It's a tough one. And ducks are another major problem. I see them on vegetable farms as well, particularly with Asian greens and small salad veggies. You can just get a flock of ducks come in off the dam, and then all of a sudden munch, and then all of a sudden their vegetables are gone. And this is big veggie farms. So, people use gas guns and things like that, which make a big boom to scare them off. That's an option. If you got a dog, you can put on a long lead in that area. I'm not sure to do that, but yes, it can get. Look, there's many challenges in farming, and there's no simple solutions to a lot of the challenges people face. What might work for someone may not work for someone else. There's you might be able to fly some those scary blow up things you see in outside shops, the scarecrows. They can keep birds away. People use lasers, lights. There's different things that people can use.
Okay. Some good options there. We've got another one saying, is there an easy way to get rid of couch grass?
Yeah, couch grass is a real challenge, and I said about that farm up on the Goulburn where Bathurst spur and couch grass just went crazy after that. So generally, if you can get it resown quick, pasture can outcompete. The thing is, couch grass it's a lot more prevalent than what people think, and it's when you get these really big events that it can tend to take over. So even on our dairy farm, Brothers Dairy Farm, for example, there will be couch there. If we were to get bare ground, the couch will take over because it's one of those colonising type plants. The idea would be try to not get bare ground and try to get an active pasture sward in there. You can spray these things, and I don't want to be just saying spray. That is one option. You can put hay down, that has seed in it, mature seed to help to get a seed base into those bare areas where couch is going. I'm not sure that we're talking a whole paddock full of couch. I would hope not. I think it would be more patches where there's been bare ground. So come back to what's causing this. Come back to the symptoms before we apply the medicine, sort of thing, and perhaps try to, if we're getting fat because we're just lazy and sitting in our chair and eating pizzas all day and Coke, maybe we need to get off the pizzas and Coke and do a bit of exercise. With pasture management too, if we're getting some bare ground, why are we getting that bare ground? Why is couch there to start with? And let's try and work our way back and find a way forward by trying to identify the cause before we just do a spray. And because if you do a spray, the couch will come back if there's nothing else to replace it. So it's there for a reason. It's actually covering the soil, which is a good thing to start with, but it's not the most ideal thing to cover your soil.
Are we talking about couch and kikuyu in the same word?
No, kikuyu is totally different. Kikuyu is very aggressive. It will grow up fence lines. It'll grow up trees. Kikuyu is actually a productive grass in some pasture situations in East Gippsland, in the south coast, like Bega area, up the coast of New South Wales. We see it more as a bit of a pesty plant down here, perhaps. However, it does grow well in summer. stays green in summer. It potentially might help protect you in a bushfire if you've got it around your house. Different things like that. They have their place, but yes, cooch and kikuyu are quite different.
So you were talking about cooch being good feed, were you?
Cooch has its place in some situations, but I would like to see once you get a frost, cooch will get frosted and go yellow and become very unpalatable. So you really need to have other more productive species in there. But if you're just got a kikuyu paddock, then if you're in East Gippsland, for example, it can be quite an effective pasture grass. Actually, it's a pretty tough one. Puts the roots down very deep. Some of the highest soil carbon measurements have been in cooch grass. Kikuyu.
Yeah.
We've got another question. They're asking, how do you establish or encourage worm activity in your paddock?
Yeah, okay. So worms don't like a very acid soil. So if your soil is really acidic, that worms will start to decrease in their populations. So make sure your pH is good. I'd be looking for at least the 5.5. As a minimum, getting it up there. They will get down to the worms can survive okay down into the 4s, but once you get into the lower 4s, worms will drop right out. They just don't like it. So increasing your pH if you've got low pH, providing a food source, so making sure your soil is actively growing, so that as roots are dying and as grass material is getting trampled in, that the roots have a food source. And a well aggregated soil that worms can actually make lots of tunnels in is good. However, worms can also make tunnels in really tight clays, and I've seen that with my soil coring. When I go down to a metre, sometimes I'll see a hole the size of a knitting needle with a little worm at the bottom in a burrow, sort of thing. So, well aggregated soils with plenty of food source for them, and making sure your pH is not too low will help worm populations. And if your pH is too low, you can add lime to help lift pH. That's a general broad assumption. Gypsum can work in some situations too if the soil's acidic. Do a little bit of research. I'm not giving you specific information here. It's just some broad information.
Someone has asked, other than goats, is there a chemical-free way to get rid of blackberries? Will just donning the welding gloves and digging them out work?
So if you're organic, blackberries are a real challenge. You can separate blackberries out from food producing zones. So you can have areas on an organic farm that you can actually manage blackberries in a chemical way if you choose to go down that path. I have seen goats, I have seen camels, I have seen slashes, I've seen like these really cool mulch things that are on like skid steer type things that can go in really steep terrain. I've seen all sorts of things. Blackberries are a big problem. They're a wands, they're a noxious weed. We've got to manage them and not be the neighbour who lets them spread everywhere else. They're on the roadsides as well. There's lots of issues around that. You can dig them out. I've seen people steam weed them as well, steam them with boiling steam with steam weeders. It's an ongoing challenge, and even if you're not organic, if you're totally conventional and still use lots of chemicals, you still have to manage your blackberries. They'll come back because the birds will fly in, the foxes will come in, they'll poop, and then you'll get them along the fence lines if a bird sits on the fence line. It's like pathostroms. There's a whole range of things like that. It's a continual management thing. You need to set time away each year to manage those things. Without herbicides, it's challenging, particularly if you've got big areas of it, for sure. But there's rust as well. Blackberry rust can help. If you haven't got it, you can go to regions where there is blackberry rust. Landcare is generally has a bit of information around that. Google blackberry rust in Victoria. talk to your local Landcare group to see whether there's been some rust released on farms or on nature strips in your area. And if so, it's just a matter of pulling some of those rusty leaves off and just stapling to some of your healthy leaves, and then let the rust. And that will help to desiccate them and slow down photosynthesis. It won't kill them outright, all of them, but it will slow things down.
Gotcha.
And the only trouble with that, of course, it also inhibits the spray from working well.
Correct.
But yeah, I've just found a lifetime battle against blackberries. I found goats very effective to getting them down, but not for actually killing them.
Yep.
I found no other method, and I've tried most methods. There's nothing out there that I know of that will kill them. Steam will just kill the surface plant, won't kill the roots.
Yeah, it's a continual thing, and if you just keep desiccating the plant, eventually it will deplete the nutrients in the stores from within the roots. But it's ongoing. I have seen pigs do a reasonable job actually on smaller farms, actually on horticulture farms. Actually, they just are contained in an area with some electric fence around them, and they just root them all up and make a big mess. And yeah, I've seen them actually work really well in that situation. But pigs are a management system in their own right. So yeah, don't go into pigs unless you've got some knowledge and some good support in that particular area.
I have a question, mainly because I'm trying to understand. A lot of people talk about wanting to have native pastures and then talking about improved pastures.
Yep.
Can you establish native pastures and actually run stock for fattening on those native pastures, or is there enough, I guess, nutrients in those sorts of species to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So weeping grass is very nutritious. It's excellent protein. Like all those grasses, whether it's native or exotic or improved or unimproved, once they set seed, the energy and digestibility drops right off. So while they're young, yep, like any feed, yes, they will be fine. But once they get to seed set and start to dry off, then the energy and protein and digestibility drops right off. So yeah, no differences. But yes, if you've got weeping grass and things like that, they're nutritious. You won't get the same yield out of them compared to the improved pastures, but then you won't have the same inputs either to get that yield. Yeah, because they don't need the high nutrient loads that some of the improved species have been developed to really thrive under.
Gotcha. I don't think there are any other questions. I don't think anyone's put anything in the chat just of yet. So I think that's it for questions. If anyone does, feel free to email through and we might be able to respond to you later on. Just a few things that I have to talk about. There's a few resources that, Peter, you've added onto this presentation, some helpful videos, some helpful resources that you've discussed. These are all available, so we'll be sending out the PDF version of these slides. You can click into any of these links and it should take you to all of these great resources that are from MLA, shelter belts and agroforestry, what you were talking about before. And then wheat. So Agriculture Victoria has some great lists and visual identification stuff. I often use it if I'm trying to think about or trying to identify something, matching some of the stuff on AgVic with some of the pictures that I have. It's a great resource. And then I think the last one is, yep, those farmer discussion groups and your contact details. You have that email listed here. And then we've got VFF Stock Sense. So we're always here. Feel free to email us and check out our resources at vff.org.au/stocksense and some of the industry groups that you referenced. So I guess this is the end of the journey, but I just wanted to do a quick overview of what we've been talking about for the past 6 weeks and some of the videos that are available. If you've only watched this one, it's really great to go back and maybe go through some of the videos and get little nuggets out of the videos. So Malcolm did the first 4, so owning and buying a farm, assessing what you want and have. And so this sort of was the beginning of the journey. You actually setting your clear goals, knowing what you want, and buying or altering the property that you have to actually match what you want. And we sort of went into the farm layout and essential facilities that you would need if you were going to buy stock, and some of the things such as quarantine paddocks, the right fencing, making sure that everything was safe and efficient for your animals. Then we said the actual buying animals part. So we had James Gadd from Elders talking about what it was like and what a livestock agent does in that process of buying animals from the stockyard, which was great, and Malcolm talking about that breeder perspective. And then we had the first few months, so talking about that induction period, what happens when you actually buy stock, getting ready for them to come onto your property, making sure that you've got those checklists, things are all right, and they can come onto your property and be safe and be put in that quarantine period, and then actually getting them climatized to your farm and getting them used to actually moving through the stockyard, so that if you ever needed to treat them or have a vet look at them in the future, they're all good. And then we had Dr. Chelsea Hare talking about that animal health, welfare and nutrition part of it, which I just covered in the beginning of this webinar. And then we had Peter talking about that long-term plan, which was amazing. So thank you. And of course, part of my job as the livestock project officer is to do this part, which is survey time. So we want to, like, as I mentioned in the beginning of today, this is the post-webinar survey. This is the last webinar of the series, and we sort of wanted to know whether we did a good job or not. This is a great opportunity to share your thoughts, areas of improvement, what you want to see next. And anything in between. So this is the first time that we've ever done something like this before, this webinar series, and talking about that journey. A lot of the people that we spoke to said there wasn't something to really talk about that whole picture and someone from starting from you. It was a lot of stuff that was commercially focused or talking about sort of when you already had been established. So this is the first time that we've done anything like this. It would be amazing to get your feedback to know if we've hit the mark or not, and if you guys want to hear stuff like this in the future. So if you just point your camera like you did before, scan the QR code, there should be a few questions, I think, to rate if your knowledge improved, what you'd like to see in the future, any sort of suggestions, that'd be amazing. And thank you. We'd greatly appreciate any feedback. I just want to say thank you so much to our presenters. So thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Malcolm, on sharing your wealth of knowledge. And it's just been amazing to work with everyone. There's so much passion for farming. There's so much passion for the future of farming, sharing that knowledge. And it's really great to sort of create something like this as an opportunity to as a platform to do that. I know I'm learning so much during this whole entire series. And thank you everyone for attending, for sharing the time that you've had throughout your days. I know it's, you know, a chunk of time out of your evenings on a Wednesday. So it's amazing that you've come out to listen to these webinars. And I hope that you've taken something away from it that you can bring back to your farm and continue that beautiful journey. And I think looking at that amazing journey of looking after not only the land, but enjoying that experience and looking after your animals, which is great. And I know it can be overwhelming. We've covered so much during this 6 weeks. We sort of tried to do a bit of an overall general stuff on that journey, but it's a long journey. It take time to enjoy it, take time to those small wins. Every mistake is a learning opportunity. I find when I make mistakes is the time where I learn the most. So it's really good. And make sure to look through the resources. I think we've compiled a long list of resources that we're going to send out to you guys. So it's going to be Excel documents, checklists, links to websites that we've found really important and useful over the past years of experience, which is great. And they're always there. We'll send it to you. I think today's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or when the final follow-up webinar email will be sent out. That'll have everything to it. It'll have a Dropbox links with all of those resources and the PDF versions of these slides, as well as previous slides, and the YouTube link for the past 6 videos. So yeah, and as Peter mentioned today, get involved with those groups. I find every single discussion group, every workshop I've gone to, every meeting has just been amazing. And it's probably the time I learn the most talking to other people in the room, because we might have the same problem and we've tackled it in different ways, and someone else has, you know, done something different, and you take those nuggets away. And, you know, visiting properties and seeing the work that's being done, it's an amazing thing. And I think that's, as you said, regional Australia has that great community and support network, which is awesome. So thank you once again, and I hope everyone has an amazing week. I hope you took away a lot and enjoyed this series, which is great. So thank you. See you, everyone. Have a beautiful night.